Hi everyone, I'm Dana and welcome back to Inverter Always. So in today's video, we're going to be finishing up all the basic programming for the ITM. In the last video, we went through and we added all the management points. There are still a few more things that we have to do. It should be a pretty simple video today. We're going to go ahead, we're going to jump right in. Of course, you guys, if you enjoyed today's video, please click the like button below. It really helps out my channel. And if you haven't already, please consider subscribing. All right, let's jump right in. All right, so if you guys recall from the last video where we left off, we were basically done programming all the management points. We had our 9 indoor units programmed, and then we also had our ERV programmed. You'll notice we still didn't have anything on the main screen. We're gonna go ahead and fix that today. But before we do, I wanted to jump in and kind of walk you through a few things that you need to make sure you get set up at the very beginning of programming the ITM, right after you're done with the management point. So we're going to go ahead, we're going to jump into the service settings menu. Remember, we click that menu list and then we do the 4 corners, top right, bottom left, top left, bottom right. And if you did it correctly, your service password screen will show up. You guys remember that password from the last video is all lowercase Daikin. And again, I will urge you guys or stress the importance of not setting something that you do not understand you're already setting. So it's very, very critical because you can screw up the way the system behaves, just like with the field settings, just like with addressing, just like with everything we talk about. This is not a training. This is not a factory authorized class. I'm just some dude who's trying to help you guys and make your jobs go a little smoother. So please take my warning seriously. You only want to change the things that you know you're changing. Don't accidentally screw something up. So as we look at all the icons in the service settings screen, there are going to be a couple things that we need to set up initially. And the first thing is going to be your dealer option. There are a bunch of features that are not enabled by default. And even if you're not using these features, I like to jump in and I like to enable them. That way, if I ever need them at some point in the future, I don't have to get into the service settings screen, enable them, and then program them. I'm going to go ahead and enable all of them now by selecting the first one, which is interlock, and then hitting the add button. It's got the little left arrows. Basically, we're moving it from the disable window over to the enable window. So I'm going to do that, and then you can continue to just click this button and move all of them over. Now, most of the time, we're not going to use emergency stop. We're not going to use power limit control. We might use web remote management, and we might use email error reporting. Most of the time, we're just going to be using interlock, though. Go ahead at this point and click on OK. It's going to ask you if you want to save the settings because the ITM will need to reboot. As discussed in the last video, I like to do a lot of my programming on the software and then upload all the software via USB because of how long it takes to reboot in the field. This is going to be an instant reboot, bringing us back to the main screen. Again, why I like to do it on the software. We're not done yet. We need to go back in and we need to do a couple more things, or at least talk about a couple of more things. So we're going to type in our password. We're going to go into the service settings screen. So now that we've got the dealer options all enabled, there is another potential icon you need to program, and it's the activation icon. This is going to be anytime you have an additional license. So if you're going to be adding BACnet server, BACnet client, if you're going to be adding tenant billing, anything like that, you're going to go in and you're going to set that key code that you get from Daikin in the activation window here. However, do not do it from the software. This is something that you have to program in on the ITM on the job site. You can't do it through the software. So pretend this icon does not exist for today's purpose. If you need to go in and change your time zone, easy to do that here. History management. LV settings. So this really is going to be if you want to enable dry mode. I like to enable it just in case the user wants to use it. And then we hit OK. That one doesn't make us reboot the ITM, which is a nice feature. So the next icon that we're going to take a look at is going to be auto changeover. But before we do, I briefly want to just show you guys the BACnet server gateway icon. If you do have BACnet, this is going to be an icon you're going to need. We're going to save this icon, though, for a future video in the series where we're going to go through and we're going to play with BACnet a little bit. So we don't need this for today. We're going to go ahead and we're going to click on auto changeover. And this is going to be the guard timer. If you recall from the nav controller series, I'll put a card in the corner now for you guys. The guard timer is the amount of time it takes once the room temperature has gone past the changeover temperature deadband before it'll actually switch modes of operation. So depending on how you're going to set up auto, whether you're going to have a really tight deadband or a wide deadband, and depending on if you're going to be using single set point or dual set point, that is going to dictate how fast you change over. And it is very, very possible to screw this up. If you're changing over every 15 minutes, plus you're using a single set point with a tight changeover deadband, you're going to have performance problems. You're going to have comfort problems. So make sure that you pick the time it takes to change over properly. I'm going to go ahead and pick 30 minutes just for this example. That does not mean you need to pick 30 minutes. Again, use the proper amount of time that is going to be needed based on how you're setting up your set points, single or dual set point, and your changeover deadband. We're going to hit OK. It's going to ask us if we want to reboot. And yes, we want to reboot. It's an instant reboot when you do it via the software, hence why I like to use the software. It's going to take you a few minutes if you're standing in front of the ITM. So push pause on this video and then come back to this video once your ITM is rebooted. So once we've rebooted, we've taken care of everything that we need to take care of, at least for the moment, in the service settings tab. So we don't need to go back to that yet. What we're going to do now is we're going to go into the auto changeover settings in the automatic control tab. This is just the normal menu tab. Click auto changeover and you'll see that it's blank. Now here's where you're going to set up the actual auto changeover for all your zones. You see, before you hooked up the ITM and registered all the addresses, all the stats were operating independently as if they were just a one-to-one mini split or VRF system. They had auto on the thermostat. They could do whatever they wanted, heat, cool, to their heart's desire. But as soon as you hooked up the ITM and registered the group address to the ITM takes control of the auto mode. And now if you walk over to the thermostat, you're going to notice there's no more auto mode. It's because the ITM handles auto and scheduling. So what you're going to do here is you're going to create an auto changeover parameter. You're going to set up how you want your units to change over from heating to cooling. Every now and then you're going to have an application where you may not want the ITM to handle the auto changeover. And one of the examples would be like if you had a building that was a condominium. So you had all these condos, and technically every condo owner owned their indoor unit. You wouldn't have the ITM handling auto changeover. Instead, what you would do in this case is set up the ITM as the slave. You wouldn't program in auto changeover, and then on all the nav controllers, you'd go in and you'd basically re-enable schedule and auto changeover, so that way the thermostat had full control of its own zone. There many times comes this misunderstanding of the controls and how the controls works, and what ends up happening is the nav's trying to do something, the ITM is overriding it, and then the nav is overriding the ITM, and it becomes this huge mess. Everybody's uncomfortable, and so sometimes you don't want to set this up. Most of the time on a commercial office building, a school, you're going to set this up because it is a building management controller. But I wanted to make sure at least to give you guys that quick little note, so that way you could make sure before you program auto changeover settings into the ITM that you know exactly what you need to set. So back on the ITM, we're going to go ahead, we're going to create a new auto changeover group. So what I'll typically call this is, I'll just call this the auto changeover mode. You can call it whatever you want. Once you create it, it's going to be disabled by default, and that's fine. But what we need to do is we need to register our indoor units to this mode. So we go over to the right-hand side, we click on register, and all of your indoor units are going to be shown as available management points. It'll also show you if changeover is available. And basically, if it ever says not available or NA, it's usually because that indoor unit is paired to another indoor unit on the same port of a branch box, and the other indoor unit is the master for that port, which means that that particular indoor unit does not have the ability to change the mode from heat to cool. In this case, if you recall from our previous video, all of our indoor units are on their own ports and they all have their own group addresses. So we're good to go as far as these units being able to heat and cool simultaneously, all on their own. Now, what I'm going to do is simply click that add button, and you'll see that all of the units on the right are moving over to the left. If for some reason there was a unit that you did not want to be in auto, so for example, let's just pretend this FXSQ54 FCU or FC 2.3, let's pretend that that was in a server room and that was a cooling only unit. Well, we wouldn't want that unit to be part of our changeover group. So in that instance, we'd want to make sure that we remove that unit 142 from our auto changeover group. That way, when we program in that auto mode, it doesn't affect 142, that server room. In this particular case, we don't have any server room units. I was just using that as an example. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to move all of our units over, and then we're going to hit the OK button. But before I do, you're probably wondering, what are all of these? The up and down arrows is just so that you can reorganize the order, sort all these units if you wanted to. If you had a end user that was like, no, I want 19 to be first because it's the lowest number, then you can move these units up and down as necessary. The wait button really comes into play when I need to give each unit a particular weighted value, because maybe I have a heat pump system. I don't have a heat recovery. If you guys recall from previous videos, heat recovery systems can heat and cool simultaneously. Basically, every port on the branch box is its own individual mini heat pump. Port C can heat, port B can cool, port I can heat, do whatever it wants all simultaneously. Well, if you don't have that and you just have a heat pump because whoever designed it, whoever paid for it, was cheaping out and did the heat pump solution instead, well, guess what? All these units are going to be in heat, or all these units are going to be in cooling. One kind of workaround is by giving all these units a different weighted value. And when you give them a weighted value, they basically have a bigger say in what mode they want. So if you add up all the units that are calling for heat and the value is 4, and then you add up all the units calling for cooling and the value is 7, the bigger value is cooling, so the system switches over to cooling. And that's what the weighted value would do in the most basic explanation. We're not going to be playing with that in today's video. We're going to go ahead and click OK. So now we have our auto changeover group created with 9 indoor units, and at this point we can go ahead and click on enable. And so now all of these indoor units will automatically be controlled individually based on our auto changeover setup. Now there's one more thing we have to do, and we have to actually set up how many degrees past the set point we want to allow the room temperature to get before it starts that guard timer that we briefly just spoke about, and then eventually switching modes. So we're going to go to attributes. And here's where we're going to go in and we're going to set up our primary changeover deadband and our secondary changeover deadband. Now, the way that this basically works is, let's say the set point was 70 degrees. I'm in auto, but the room temperature is 65 degrees. The thermostat's just going to say heat. Why? Because the thermostat is only going to say the active mode that it's in, or the current mode that it's in. The ITM is in auto, but the nav controller is only in heat or only in cooling. So it's going to heat to 70 degrees. And depending on how you set up the field settings, from previous videos, we've talked about this before, you can have either a 1 degree or a 2 degree Fahrenheit deadband. So we like to program a 1 degree Fahrenheit deadband. That way, as soon as the room temperature gets to 71, it satisfies. So based on how you program that thermo on-off deadband, you need to come in here and you need to set up your primary changeover deadband. So if you have a single set point application, and that is your set point is 70 for heating and it's 70 for cooling, then what you're going to need is at least a 2 degree primary changeover deadband. And that's because you're going to have a 1 degree overshoot every single time already because of the thermal on-off deadband. Your unit is in heat, heats to 70, satisfies at 71. If you set this to 1, then as soon as the unit satisfies, it's going to switch to the opposite mode. It's going to start cooling down to 70. It's going to satisfy at 69, and it's going to immediately switch back to heat. Oh my gosh, you're going to have comfort issues, you're going to have complaints, and potentially performance issues as well. So this deadband needs to be at least 1 degree past the thermo on-off deadband. Now, most of the time, we like to use what's called dual set point. Dual set point means I'm going to heat to 70 and I'm going to cool to something like, I don't know, 72. There's a buffer in between 70 and 72. So when my unit satisfies at 71 in the heat mode, technically it still needs to get at least to 73 degrees before it can switch over. In that case, you can change your primary deadband to 1 because when it satisfies at 71 degrees, it's not going to immediately switch modes. The room temperature has to get to the cooling set point, which is 72 in this example, then has to get 1 degree past that. That 1 degree past that is right here. 1 degree past the cooling set point will trigger the guard timer, which we set for 30 minutes. You might have set it for 15. You might have left it at 60. I don't know. At any point in time, if the room temperature gets to this secondary deadband of 1 degree, so 74 degrees in our case, it will override the timer and immediately change over. I always leave the secondary changeover deadband to 1 degree. This is my safety. This is my, oops, it got too warm, or oops, it got too cold. I'm going to immediately override that guard timer and I'm going to change the mode. So you want to try to set up the primary changeover deadband based on how you want that system to operate normally. If you're going to have a 70 degree heat set point and you're going to have a 73 degree cool set point, that means at 74 degrees, it's going to start the guard timer. And then once the guard timer has expired, it will then change modes. So you might have to play around with this a little bit. Just be careful not to set this at 1 degree when you have a single set point. Otherwise, you're going to have problems. Regarding the reference method, you're going to have this set to individual anytime you have a heat recovery system. And that's because we want each indoor unit to have an individual reference. We don't want 102 to switch over when 101 switches over. The only time you're going to change the reference method to fixed, average, or voting is based on when you have a heat pump system, or maybe you have a group of indoor units that share one port on a heat recovery system. That's the only time you're going to use fixed, averaged, or the vote reference method. And I'm using very general reference here. Sure, there's probably some very particular applications out there where you had to use fixed, averaged, or vote on a heat recovery option, but 99.9% of the time, we're just going to click on individual. And because this video is all the basic setup for the most common applications, you're going to click individual on heat recovery system. So we're going to go ahead, we're going to click on OK, and now we've successfully set up our auto changeover parameters. Since we're already on the automatic control tab, I will quickly show you guys that there is an option to set up the schedules. We're going to do scheduling in a dedicated video, so we're not going to talk about that today. There's also an option to do something called interlocking control. Again, this is going to be a dedicated video. We're going to talk about this after we talk about something called the WAGO. It's going to be later in the series, so don't worry about these two icons. We're going to get to them in a future video. Timer extension, this is only going to be needed if you use something called setback. We're going to talk about setback more than likely in the next video. Basically, all it does is if you are in setback, setback turns off all of your indoor units. If your units are off on an office building or at a school, and let's say the teacher stays late, their unit turns off. They want to turn it back on. As soon as they turn it back on so they can have some heating or cooling, this is how long it stays on for. So you can pick whatever you want from a half hour up to 3 hours. The default's 120 minutes. I pretty much just leave it there. If we go to system settings, here's where we're going to be able to set up some very cool things. We're going to talk about how to set up the area in just a moment. Management points, this is where I can go in and I can change the name of any of these management points in the event that maybe I did originally put FCU marks here. Now I want to go in and fill it in with room numbers. Just click on whichever unit you want changed, hit modify, and now I can modify that information. So pretty easy to get to that if you need to. Network, we're going to have a dedicated video for, and this is so that we can hook up the ITM to the local network or for remote access. And we'll do that again in a dedicated video. Same thing with the email. If we talk about it in this series at all, it's not used super commonly, at least not for me. Web access users we'll talk about in the same video as the network video, and this is basically setting up your credentials so that you can log into the ITM from either remotely or on your local building network. Here we can go in and change the passwords. We're not going to do that today. Same thing with screensaver and your hardware. This is things like your button presses and your sounds on the ITM itself. You can readjust the calibration of the touch panel. That's where those little 4 circles had popped up in a previous video when we first uploaded the software. Nothing we need to talk about in today's video. I'm just kind of explaining what all these icons are and what they do. So while we're here, we're going to click on area. And basically what we're going to do is we're going to create a new layer. I'm going to close real quick. I'm going to close the menu real quick, and we're going to go back to the main screen. This is our top layer. So if you notice that the top button at the top of the screen is grayed out, it's because we're already on the top layer. If we want to go down a layer, we can click the all icon and then click the down button. And now we've gone down 1 layer. It shows us our indoor units and our ventilators. So if I want to look at indoor units, I can click on indoor units and then click down again, and it goes down to a further layer. At any point in time, I can go up a layer, or I can simply click on top to go back to the top layer. What I like to do personally is I like to put some icons on the top layer for quick and easy access. And that might be, let's say if I've got 3 floors on an office building, I can put all the indoor units on floor 1 on an icon, floor 2 on an icon, floor 3 on an icon, or maybe I have different departments. I can put all the indoor units in the administration department on an icon. I can put all the indoor units that are in the IT department and server rooms on an icon. I can put all the classrooms on an icon. So you can kind of get creative here with how you organize all your data points. Now, as far as today goes, we just have 9 data points plus an ERV. There's not a whole lot for us to actually put as far as layers go. We'll get creative. We'll create 1 or 2 just for the example of this video. But when you get out onto a real job site, sometimes you're going to have 150, 160, 200 indoor units. You're going to want to make sure that you have, something that is organized so that you can find all of your indoor units quickly and efficiently. So what we're going to do, we're going to go back to the menu. We're going to click on system settings, and then we're going to click on area, and we're going to create a new layer. Now, it's very important to look at the hierarchy or importance level of each of these existing layers. We have the top layer. This is the very, very top. You'll see that it goes from 1 to 2, lower hierarchy. It's deeper and deeper into the folder set. We want the layer to be on the top screen. So we always click on top, then we click on create. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to create an area on the top layer. So we click on create. We're simply going to give it a name. So we only have 9 indoor units here. So why don't we just call A wing and B wing as our layers? So we're going to go back to top. We're going to create B wing. So now we have these 2 layers, and you're going to notice that they have a 1 next to them. That means that they're going to be on the top layer, just like all. So when we go back to the top, let's go ahead and hit close. You'll see now we have all, A wing, and B wing. All, if we go down a layer, has 2 different icons. So if we go to A, we have nothing because we haven't registered anything there yet. So we're going to go to A wing. And we're going to go to management point selection. So when we click on management point selection, then here's our 9 indoor units plus our ERV, so 10 total. Here's where we can actually say, okay, these are the units that are in the A wing. So let's just pretend, okay, we've got 19 and 30, and you'll notice that all these room numbers are really close to each other. So let's just pretend these 2 units are part of the A wing. So we put them in the A wing, and now you see there's 2 management points registered to the A wing. And now we're going to go to B wing, and we're going to do the same thing, management point selection. We're going to grab all the rest of our indoor units. So we're going to grab all those. I'm not going to grab the ERV because if you recall, the ERV is already in its own layer under the indoor and ventilator layers. So I'm going to go ahead and click OK. I've got my 7 indoor units that are all part of the B wing and 2 indoor units that are part of the A wing. Again, just for today's example, we took these 9 units. We're just making up A wing and B wing. So we have a couple of icons on the main page. Let's say you didn't want ventilator 2 layers down. You wanted it on the main page. You could go back to top. You could hit create, and let's just call this ERV. Or you know what, we could call this ventilation. Hey, maybe the end user just, hey, I need an icon that says ventilation on the top, no problem. Hit management point selection, go all the way down, move over your ERV, hit OK. And now when you go back, you're going to have your all, your A wing, your B wing, and your ventilation. So now I could click on A wing, go down, and there's my 2 units in the A wing. I could click on B wing, click down, and there's all my units that are part of the B wing. And of course I could click on ventilation and see the 1 ERV that I have. What's cool about creating layers is I can now control everything in the A wing from right here on the right hand side of the screen. And we're going to talk about this in a little bit more detail in the next video where I go through and show you how to do things. We can also now create a schedule for everything in the A wing. Before creating this, we could only create a schedule for all, or for indoor, or for ventilator, or for an individual indoor unit. We'll talk about this in more detail when we go through a dedicated video talking about the schedule, but this creation of layers, or areas, if you will, is going to be very, very helpful when you're trying to give unique schedules or unique commands to particular groups of units. So at this point now, we've got all of our units shown on here in a way that is easy for the end user to quickly walk over to the B wing and turn everything on. I want to turn everything on in the B wing, and now I've turned everything on in the B wing. So we'll talk about setting up all the set points in the next video. It's not going to be part of today's video. We're going to finish up with operation management. This tab, you're not going to do a whole lot with it. We don't have PPD set up, but you can look at the history. If you want to look at the history, you can basically look at 4 different things. You can look at all your error codes. This is most common. Any control devices like things booting up and whatnot, settings that change, indoor units that call or don't call. Most of the time, I want to see what my error codes are. So once you select the box that you want to look for, select the date. Right now on Saturday, we don't have any error codes, but let's say I wanted to go back and see some error codes. I could go back to a previous date, click on show updates, and it's going to show you any errors that pop up here. There's no errors here. The only thing that happened today was I started up my ITM software. So it's not going to show me anything, but it could potentially show you something. And then if you wanted to send an output to an Excel spreadsheet, you could click output, and then you could export all those error codes to an Excel spreadsheet. Set up your export. So if you're done programming everything physically on the ITM, and now you want to export a copy of it, you can do that via the setup export, plug in your USB stick, and then it'll export that file to your USB stick. And same thing with operation data export. Now data operation, so this item here is going to give you 2 different batches of data. It'll give you just the basic on off, I turned on, I turned off data, unless you go into the back end, program what's called the AirNet monitoring tool so that you can actually have your ITM trend data, performance data, pressures and temperatures, thermistors. So at that point, this would then export all of that data as well. We'll talk about that in one of the last videos of the series. So you guys, that's going to be it for today. We, at this point, have the ITM basically programmed. And in the next couple of videos, I'm going to go through, I'm going to show you guys how to use the ITM, how to set up dual set point versus single set point. We'll talk about the setback features, and then we'll barely start scratching the surface on schedules. I really want schedules to be a dedicated video because there's some things that you need to know about it to kind of keep you guys out of trouble. But as far as today goes, that's going to wrap things up. If you guys have any questions, please don't hesitate. Put them in the comments below. As always, you guys know by now, I will respond to your comments. I read all of your comments. Of course, if you guys are a channel member, you get priority response. So I'll respond to your comments or questions first, but I do my best to eventually get to all of you. You guys, I greatly appreciate your support. Thank you for tuning in. If you enjoyed today's video, please click the like button below. It really helps out my channel. And if you haven't already, please consider subscribing. Thank you so much for watching Inverter Always, you guys. I hope you all have an awesome day.